Good morning, I'm Alex Cortright. Gun violence is everywhere in America, in our homes, on the streets, in universities and schools, in movie theaters, in places of worship, at public gatherings, everywhere. Would it shock you to know that here in the U.S., 4 people will be killed by guns in this very hour? 31,000 lives will end this year because of gun violence. Now, a little over a month ago, a summit hosted by the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health and the Center for Gun Policy and Research convened in Baltimore. It was called the Summit on Reducing Gun Violence in America, Informing Policy with Evidence and Analysis, and gathered over 20 experts in the field to share research and data in an effort ultimately to recommend policy. This summit culminated in the publication of a new book that I want you to know about. It's called Reducing Gun Violence in America, Informing Policy with Evidence and Analysis. Now, this collection of essays is edited by Daniel Webster and Jan Vernick of the Johns Hopkins University. And now Daniel Webster joins us from his office in Baltimore to talk about this new book. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
There are some 80 million gun owners in the U.S., and clearly the majority of these citizens will never use their firearms to commit a crime, to kill a person. However, we do see that states with the highest gun ownership rates have gun murder rates 114% higher than states with the lowest gun ownership rates. All you have to do is simply compare, for example, Wyoming to Hawaii or Montana to Massachusetts to see this clearly. Do you suppose it's true that where there are more guns, there is indeed more gun violence?
Well, there's certainly more gun deaths across the board, and it's important to think about actually the most common form of firearm death is suicide in the United States. Mm-hmm. There are roughly 19,000 firearm suicides every year, particularly in states with high levels of gun ownership. They tend to have much higher rates of gun suicide. And when you account for other sort of social factors and differences between states, again, there is a positive correlation between more gun ownership and more gun homicides. I think it's useful, however, and I think you mentioned this in your lead-in, that, most gun owners are safe, don't necessarily represent any threat to the community safety. I think really what's most relevant here, and the way we try to frame this issue in our new book is, what's the important policy question? I think the one reason that there are higher rates of gun deaths in states with more gun ownership is not only that there are simply more guns there, but it's because those states tend to have very important gaps in their gun laws that make it far too easy for dangerous people to get guns. And that's a key thing that we focus on in this book, that we identify where the weaknesses in our current policies. We generally have relatively lax standards for legal gun ownership. We generally have inadequate measures to regulate and hold people accountable so they don't transfer guns to prohibited individuals. These kind of problems that are solvable. It seems as though in a lot of the discussions and debates you see in the media, it seems as though this is too big of a problem with too much division of opinion in the United States. But when you break it down into what science says is most important, which is keeping guns from dangerous people, and you also look at opinion surveys, which we did in our new book, asked people very specific questions about policies designed to keep guns from dangerous people, it turns out that we're generally in agreement. Gun owners as well as non-gun owners, Republicans as well as Democrats, generally overwhelmingly favor policies designed to keep guns from dangerous people. And so that's where we think we have the most promise to make an impact so that we can ultimately make some policies reforms that will save lives.
We're speaking this morning to Professor Daniel Webster of the Johns Hopkins University, who co-edited a new book called Reducing Gun Violence in America, Informing Policy with Evidence and Analysis. And of course, politically on a national level and on a statewide level, this is becoming an increasingly important topic and issue for us. The new book that you helped to edit here, Professor, makes specific recommendations to policymakers. Now, of course, there's a lot in this book. What do you think, in short, if you were to distill the essence of this book down to a few things, what needs to be done to make our nation safer for us and for our children?
That's a good question. I think the consensus among the experts who came together to write this book was that the single most important thing is universal background checks. We have, in essence, an incomplete system currently in place, and we shouldn't expect much of it if it's not truly a full system.
Daniel Webster, the co-editor of Reducing Gun Violence in America, a new book on the Johns Hopkins University Press, joins us this morning. Professor, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and your time with us today here at WRNR.
Well, thanks for having me.